Ma'am? I promise I'll get some folks in the back later. I'm sorry.
With a counterinsurgency strategy, how do you work toward a foreseeable end? I mean, to me, it just seems like the conflict could just go on forever. Like, how do you have specific goals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. It's a fantastic question. Ideally, and this is often a concern that people have about counterinsurgency strategies because it can lead to a kind of a war without end. Ideally, you have a situation like Iraq where the Iraqis are kicking us out. We have succeeded in Iraq to such a degree in 2007 and 2008 of boosting the government, of supporting key institutions in Iraq, of strengthening the Iraqi political process, that Iraq says, you know what, we want to negotiate a status of forces agreement. And we expect there to be a clear withdrawal. We expect there to be a clear timeline on your withdrawal. So a lot of this is dependent on building up host nation security capabilities. And this is the case where the commander on the ground is always going to want to stay longer, is always going to want to keep as many resources there as possible. A guy like General Odierno in Iraq right now, he's going to want to keep as many soldiers in Iraq as possible in case, I don't know, Arab-Kurd relationships or violence flares up. Hey, it's legitimate, but it ultimately falls down on the president and on the political decision makers in Washington to say, right, I got it, I hear your concerns, but good enough is good enough. And at some point, we can't have a permanent heavy presence in Iraq or in Afghanistan. So it really falls upon the political decision makers, and they themselves are pretty sensitive towards domestic political concerns. Counterinsurgency campaigns are really hard to wage if you're a democracy. They're really difficult to wage in democracies because there's always going to be a vocal party that's saying, let's just get out now. And so your best hope is to move a conflict off the front pages, like we did with Iraq when violence plummeted, and then you negotiate with the host nation and make the decision to leave. But at the end of the day, the political elected civilian decision makers, I'm speaking from the American experience obviously, elected civilian decision makers have to be the ones to make the call that, okay, we've done is what we can do, and now we need to pull out. Because there's not going to be like the fall of Berlin, right? There's not going to be a surrender ceremony on the USS Missouri. There's not going to be a definitive end to the conflict where we're dancing in Times Square and, kissing nurses and stuff. So, yeah.
I was wondering what specifically the U.S. military is doing to basically win the hearts of the population in Afghanistan, like the general population.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. First off, I don't know if you saw the latest ABC, BBC polling. But over the past 5 years, Afghan approval ratings for international forces have plummeted. Not plummeted, but have steadily declined in Afghanistan. In large part, this is due to civilian casualties. Civilian casualties caused by NATO ISAF themselves plummeted with new restrictions on how we use air power in Afghanistan. And I can't guarantee the causal relationship is secure, but nonetheless, in the most recent ABC, BBC polling, approval, the way that Afghans think about international forces in Afghanistan has risen considerably to where it's mostly favorable. Not so favorable when thinking about their own government, but hey, but they like us. And so we are being successful, I think, in some of the things that we have done. The trick, again, whenever you wage a counterinsurgency campaign as a third party on behalf of a host nation, the trick is getting that host nation to do the right things, to make the right decisions with respect to governance, with respect to transparency, with respect to, forget transparency, with respect to anti-corruption. Sometimes transparency is not the right thing, right? Because if we have full transparency, then everybody can see all the corruption that does take place, and they're just angrier. But trying to get the host nation to behave in a responsible way. And that's tricky. That's where leverage comes into play. And that's actually part of the ongoing research I'm doing, how we use leverage in conflict environments. One of the ways we do is if you look at the Iraqi or Afghan army, all their maintenance contracts are run by American corporations. Okay, now you may say, that's the political military industrial complex at work. It's horrible. But it's actually quite smart. because it's a way in which we have leverage over the behavior of the host nation government. And that's always going to be a struggle, to try to get the host nation government to behave in, if not a Jeffersonian way, then at least in a comparatively responsible way toward their population. I think we've got time for one more question. Ma'am, we'll give it to you.
I was so disappointed when the president didn't give McChrystal the full number of troops that he asked for, and yet put the time frame. Well, I mean, he was saying, I want us out by whatever the date was. When you do a strategy with the general, for instance, do you sort of inflate your numbers knowing that you might not get what you want? And can McChrystal accomplish what he wants in Afghanistan, helping stabilize things and get their infrastructure running with the number of troops that Obama?
Okay, that's a good question to end on. Actually, does anybody else have a really pressing question? Because I can bundle one more. If anybody has a really pressing question. Okay, we'll end on that. So a couple things. First off, it was always General McChrystal's intent to not submit one request, but to submit several different requests to say, hey, look, if you give me A number of troops, I can do X. If you give me B number of troops, I can do Y. If you give me C number of troops, I can do Z. And with each option carries a certain number of risks. So, so when it comes to different options, the president gave the General McChrystal many more than option C, less than option A, around the same as option B. The real number was, okay, 40,000 was the number that people fixated on in the media. That was about as many as we thought we could get into Afghanistan over a 12-month period of time, A. B, the president committed 30,000 new troops. Our European allies committed 750. So we got 3,700 or 37,500 troops. Nobody's complaining. So, so the idea that McChrystal didn't get the resources that he needed or he wanted, it's not an issue. Certainly not in NATO ISAF headquarters. It's, I don't know.
He seemed to say, I can work with that.
Absolutely.
And I thought, well, I hope that's true.
Yeah.
You hate to wait. You just hate us to go in. And
No. He got everything that he needed. A. B. With respect to the timeline, now there are two answers to this. One is it's a messaging thing, and this is my complaint with the president. And it's not the worst thing, because they walked it back as much as possible over the next 2 days. They said, look, we're going to begin to withdraw. That doesn't mean we're going to, hightail it out of there, be packing our bags. But it wasn't very smart from a messaging perspective when he delivered the West Point speech. But honestly, again, McChrystal's advisors will be the first ones to tell you that, hey, look, if we don't see results in 18 months, we've got a problem with our operations and strategy. Okay, we've got a problem. So, so there's not, I think both Republicans and Democrats have fretted about tension between the command in Kabul and the White House. It just doesn't exist. They get along quite well. So, all right, thank you very much for this opportunity.